Walmart at night is different. During the day, it's chaotic, crowds moving in and out, bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the constant beeping of registers. But at night? At night, the store is too quiet. Too empty. And that's when you start hearing things you shouldn't. I worked the graveyard shift in the warehouse at a Walmart in a small town in Texas. It wasn't a bad job stacking boxes, restocking shelves, unloading deliveries. Easy money, no customers, no managers breathing down my neck. Just a skeleton crew of 5 people spread across the backrooms. And a whole lot of silence. Too much silence. The first time I noticed something was off, it was about 2 weeks into the job. I was stacking pallets of bottled water near the back when I heard it. A noise. Faint. Too faint to be normal. It came from the far side of the warehouse, near the old receiving doors we didn't use anymore. A soft shuffle. Like footsteps. I froze. Listened. Nothing. I shook it off, went back to work. That was the first time. The first time I told myself I was just hearing things. But it wouldn't be the last. A few nights later, one of the guys didn't show up for his shift. His name was Luis. Worked there for years, always clocked in on time, never called out. But that night? Nothing. No text. No call. He just never came in. Our supervisor, Bill, was pissed. Probably quit without saying anything, he muttered, shaking his head. But something about it bothered me. Luis liked this job. Had a kid on the way. He wouldn't just walk out. And then, 2 nights later, the manager sent out a memo. If anyone hears from Luis, let us know. We need to collect his work badge and finalize his termination. No mention of why. No mention of what happened to him. Just gone. Like he had never existed. That same night, I was working near the break room when I overheard a conversation between 2 of the managers. They were whispering. Hushed. Like they didn't want anyone to hear. But I caught one sentence. Just one. And it made my stomach turn. The security footage cut out again. I kept my head down. Pretended not to hear. But my mind was spinning. Security cameras in the warehouse ran 24/7. No blind spots. No glitches. But they cut out the same night Luis disappeared? Something wasn't right, and I was about to find out how bad it really was. Around 2 a.m. I was assigned to Zone 3, the section near the old loading docks. No one liked working that area. It was cold, damp, and the air smelled stale, like the walls had been wet for too long. Those doors hadn't been used in years. There was no reason to go back there. And yet, when I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. One of the receiving doors was open. Just a few inches. Enough to see the pitch-black parking lot beyond. Enough to make my stomach drop. I wasn't alone back here. Someone else was in the warehouse. And they weren't supposed to be. I stepped forward, my heartbeat hammering. Hello? My voice sounded too loud. The door swayed slightly in the breeze. I reached out, grabbed the handle, and then I heard it. A shuffling sound. Inside the warehouse. Not from the parking lot. From behind me. I turned fast, and for just a split second, I saw someone standing at the end of the aisle. A shape. Tall. Still. Watching me. Then the motion sensor lights flickered. And the figure was gone. I slammed the loading dock door shut. Locked it. Backed away, my pulse racing. I needed to find Bill. Tell him someone was in the warehouse. But as I turned, I heard it. The sound that made my skin crawl. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Following me. But when I spun around, there was no one there. I walked faster. The footsteps kept pace. I turned the corner. Broke into a jog. And then, as I reached the main aisle leading to the break room, I saw it. A single work boot. Lying in the middle of the floor. Old. Dirty. And I knew it. I had seen that boot before. Luis wore them. Every single night. I stared down at it, my hands shaking. And then, from somewhere deep in the warehouse, a voice. Low. Raspy. And too close. It whispered. You shouldn't be here. I stood frozen, staring at the boot. Luis' boot. It lay there, half-tipped over, the laces still loosely tied. Like someone had just stepped out of it. Like someone had been dragged out of it. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My fingers curled into tight fists. I wasn't alone back here. I took a slow step back, my boot scraping against the concrete floor. The noise echoed through the empty warehouse. Somewhere in the distance, a metal shelf creaked. I flinched, my head snapping toward the sound. The aisles stretched into darkness. No movement. No signs of anyone. Just the humming of the overhead lights, buzzing like flies trapped in glass. And then, another sound. A soft scuff. Like someone shifting their foot against the floor. Not far. Too close. I turned fast, my breath shaking. The warehouse felt tighter now. Like the shelves were closing in. Like something was watching from behind them. I forced myself to breathe. This was stupid. It was just a boot. Just an empty aisle. Luis was gone. Maybe he left it behind. Maybe? Creak. I jerked my head up. A shelf. A shelf moved. It wasn't much. Just a small shift. A subtle wobble like someone had brushed against it. Like someone had just been standing there. But when I stepped closer, when I reached out and placed my fingers against the metal, the shelf was warm. I needed to find Bill. Now. I turned on my heel, walking fast, my arms stiff at my sides. With every step, my heartbeat thumped against my ribs. My hands were clammy. I wiped them against my jeans, my fingers twitching. The break room was just ahead. The glass door was propped open, spilling weak yellow light into the hall. And then, I saw something new. Something that made my stomach twist. To the left of the break room, tucked in the shadows, there was a metal locker. Not one of ours. Not from the employee area. This was an older model. Rust streaked down the sides, the handle bent slightly like someone had pried it open before. I'd never seen it before tonight. And yet, something about it felt wrong. Like it had been sitting there for a long time. Like someone had been using it when they weren't supposed to. I licked my lips, my fingers hovering over the latch. The metal was cool, slick with dust. I took a shaky breath. Gripped the handle. Pulled. Inside a single Walmart vest. Crumpled. Covered in dark stains. And pinned to the fabric, half-rusted with age, was a name tag. My fingers tightened around the edge as I lifted it. The letters were smudged. Barely readable. But I could still make it out. Luis. What are you doing? I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned fast, Bill stood in the doorway of the break room. His arms were crossed, face unreadable. His eyes flicked to the locker, then back to me. His jaw tightened. I held up the vest. My fingers shook. This is Luis, I said, my voice coming out hoarse. Bill didn't move. Didn't react. Just let out a slow, heavy breath through his nose. Like he had already expected this. Like he had already known. You should clock out, kid. His voice was flat. Empty. Like he was done talking. Like there was nothing else to say. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Bill turned, walking back into the break room without another word. The door swung shut behind him. I stood there, my fingers gripping Luis' vest. It felt too heavy now. Like it wasn't just fabric anymore. Like it meant something else. I backed away from the locker. From the vest. From the break room door. And as I turned toward the hallway, I heard it. A voice. Low. Raspy. Coming from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. A whisper that curled against my spine like ice. Help me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the warehouse stretching into darkness. Rows of towering shelves. The air thick, heavy, pressing against my chest. I took a step forward. And then, a light flickered on. Not the ones above me. Not the break room lights. The motion sensor in aisle 17. Deep in the warehouse. Too far for anyone to be walking past. But something triggered it. Something was there. Waiting. I swallowed hard. My fingers clenched into tight fists. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to walk away. To leave. To go home and never come back. But instead, I took a step forward. Then another. And another. Until I was standing at the edge of the aisle. And that's when I saw it. A trail of footprints. Leading deeper into the darkness. Smudged uneven. Like someone had been dragging their feet. Like someone had been taken. And at the end of the trail, just barely visible in the dim light, a single handprint. Smeared against the metal shelf. Fresh. Still wet. And as I reached outer, as my fingers hovered just over the dark stain, the motion light behind me flickered off. And in the silence, I heard breathing. Right behind me. The breath against my neck was warm. Real. I wasn't alone. I whipped around, and the motion light flicked back on. But there was no one there. Just aisles of towering shelves, stretching into the darkness. Just the quiet hum of the store. Just the smeared handprint on the metal shelf beside me. Still wet. Still warm. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the stain. It wasn't dirt. Wasn't grease. It was thicker. Darker. I wiped my thumb against the smear, and my breath caught in my throat. It was blood. Fresh. Still dripping down the metal. Someone had been here, and they were hurt. I took a step back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The warehouse felt different now. Smaller. Tighter. Like the walls were closing in. like something was waiting for me to follow. And then, a noise, a thud. From the other end of the aisle, something fell, something big. I turned the corner fast, my boots slipping on the floor, my breath hitched. There, just a few feet away, a body, face down on the concrete, motionless. I stepped forward, my hands shaking. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, flickering. I could hear my own breathing. Too fast, too shaky. The body twitched. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Then, a low groan. I knelt beside him, rolled him over, and my stomach dropped. It was Luis. His uniform shirt was soaked in blood. A deep, ugly gash ran across his stomach, his skin pale, clammy. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy, unfocused. His lips moved. A weak whisper. I leaned in, my hands tightening on his vest. "Who did this to you?" Luis' breath hitched. His hand shot up, fingers digging into my wrist. His voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. "You have to go." His grip tightened. "They don't let you leave." And then, his head snapped to the side. His body seized up, and he stopped moving. I sat there, my hands covered in his blood. My body felt numb, like I was floating, like I wasn't really here. And then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from behind me. I turned my head just enough to look over my shoulder. A shadow stretched along the warehouse floor. Tall. Too tall. The footsteps stopped. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. And then, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. Fingers digging in hard. I was yanked backward. Hard. I hit the ground with a dull thud, my head smacking the concrete. Stars exploded behind my eyes. For a split second, everything blurred. And then I saw him. It wasn't Bill. Wasn't security. It was a man in a Walmart vest. But not a normal one. His vest was old, dirty, faded like it had been worn for years. But the worst part? I had never seen him before. He crouched beside me, his head tilting slightly. His eyes were dark, sunken in. His lips curled into a slow, thin smile. "You shouldn't have found him." His voice was low, flat, like it had been used too many times. Like it wasn't his voice anymore. I tried to move, tried to push away, but he grabbed my wrist, tight. His nails dug into my skin. His other hand reached into his vest pocket, pulled out something that made my stomach turn. Hearing. Hundreds of them. All identical employee keys. Some were rusted. Some were bent. And one of them had Luis' name carved into it. My breath caught. I tried to yank my hand free, but his grip tightened. He leaned in, his face too close to mine. And then, he whispered, "You have a shift to finish." A noise from the dark aisle behind him. A rustling. A shuffle. And then, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. All standing between the warehouse shelves. All wearing Walmart vests. But their faces were wrong. Pale. Too thin. Eyes empty. Unfocused. Like they had been here too long. Like they had been working this shift forever. I thrashed, kicked, struggled. My boot slammed into the man's chest. He staggered back, his grip loosening. I scrambled to my feet. Ran. Didn't think. Didn't look back. Just ran. I hit the break room door so hard it rattled. I threw myself inside, locking it behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. My vision blurred. And then, I saw Bill, sitting at the table, calm, like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just sent me out there to die. And beside him, a single name tag, freshly printed. My name, Jason Night Shift. I turned to him, heart hammering. "What the hell is this?" Bill took a slow sip of coffee. Didn't answer. Didn't even look at me. Then he set his cup down. And with a flat, hollow voice, he said, "You're one of us now." The break room door rattled. Something was pushing against it. Not knocking. Not kicking. Just a slow, steady pressure. Like someone was leaning into it. Like they were waiting for me to open it myself. I stood frozen, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Bill sat at the plastic table, still stirring his coffee, acting like nothing was wrong. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Too bright. Too normal. Like the warehouse behind that door wasn't filled with something awful. Like I hadn't just seen Luis bleeding out in aisle 17. Like there wasn't a man with a ring of employee keys standing outside, waiting for me. I grabbed the name tag off the table, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. What the hell is this, Bill? He let out a slow breath, rubbing his face like he was tired of explaining. Like he'd done this before. Then he finally spoke. We all have a shift to finish. His voice was flat. Dead. Like it wasn't even his voice anymore. The door handle started to turn. Slowly. Like someone was testing it. I backed up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Bill didn't move. Didn't even glance at the door. Like he knew exactly who was on the other side. Then, a sound from above. A low creak. Like something was shifting in the ceiling vents. Like something big. I looked up. And for a split second, in the vent above the lockers, I saw a hand. Pale. Too thin. Fingers curled around the metal grating. And then, it pulled away. Back into the darkness. My stomach turned. I turned back to Bill, my pulse pounding in my ears. Luis is dead. I saw him. But Bill cut me off. Luis isn't dead. I blinked. Shook my head. He bled out right in front of me, Bill. Bill finally looked up. And his expression, I'll never forget it. It was almost pity. Like I had just said something stupid. Like I had just missed the whole point. You don't get it, do you? He murmured. Then he nodded toward the door. I followed his gaze. And my blood went cold. The door handle stopped moving. The rattling ceased. For a moment everything was silent. Then, a voice. Low. Dry. And familiar. From the other side of the door. Jason, let me in. It was Luis. But that was impossible. Luis was dead. I saw him die. And yet, his voice was right there. Muffled by the break room door. Come on, man. Just open up. It's me. His tone was casual, easy. Like we were just co-workers on another shift. Like he wasn't supposed to be rotting in aisle 17. I looked at Bill. His expression didn't change. Like he already knew what I'd hear. Like this was just another part of the job. And that's when it clicked. Luis isn't dead because no one here ever dies. They just stay. I backed away from the break room door. Away from Bill. Away from Luis' voice. I needed to get out. Find a way to escape before I became part of this. And then I saw it. A second door. Leading into the storage freezers. Slightly open. A breath of cold air leaking out. I made a choice. I bolted. I ripped open the freezer door, stepping inside. The air hit me like ice, burning my lungs. It was pitch dark. Aisles of stacked frozen pallets and industrial shelves. A place that no one checked at night. A place where I could hide. But as I turned to shut the door behind me, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Pinned to the inside of the freezer door was a clipboard, covered in names. A handwritten list. Column after column. Employees. But not just anyone. Employees who had worked the night shift. Their names were crossed out. All except one. Mine. Jason, night shift. And beneath my name, a line of empty space. Like there was room for someone else to join me soon. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a job. This was a trap. And I was already part of it. Then, a noise. A low exhale. I turned too fast. Slipped on the frozen floor. Fell hard onto my side. And when I looked up, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. At the far end of the freezer. The wall wasn't a wall. It was a door. A heavy industrial metal door. With no handle. Just a single, rusted sign bolted to the center. Faded. But still readable. Employees only. No exit. A shadow moved behind it. A low shuffle. And then, a hand. Pale. Thin. Reaching from the gap at the bottom. Fingers curling, scratching at the floor. Like it was trying to crawl out. Like it had been trapped there for too long. Like it had once been just like me. I scrambled to my feet. Turned for the door. And behind me. A voice. Low. Flat. Like it had been used too many times. Like it didn't belong to just one person anymore. Jason, your shift isn't over. The freezer was too quiet. The hand beneath the metal door twitched. The fingers curled inward. Slow, unnatural. Like it was trying to grip something that wasn't there. Like it was testing the air. Testing me. I backed away. My boots slipping on the frozen floor. The clipboard with the employee names fluttered in the cold breeze. My name was the only one not crossed out. But I knew, by the end of tonight, they'd be etching a new name beneath mine. Someone else. Someone who'd take my place. Because Walmart's night shift never ends. A low knocking came from behind the metal door. Then, a second knock. And a third. Rhythmic. Like multiple people tapping in unison. Like something was moving on the other side. Trying to get closer. Trying to be let out. My breath hitched. I turned. Bolted toward the freezer exit. Grabbed the handle. And yanked. The door didn't budge. I pulled harder. Still nothing. I was locked in. The knocking behind me grew louder. And then, a voice. Low. Flat. You can't leave. I spun around, my pulse pounding. The knocking had stopped. But something was there now. Something just beyond the door. I could feel it. And then, a single piece of paper slid out from under the metal door. It fluttered onto the frozen floor. I stared at it. First, I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, slowly, I stepped forward. Knelt down. Picked it up with shaking fingers. And my blood went cold. It was a page from the Walmart employee handbook. But this version, it was different. The text was faded, aged, crumpled. And at the very bottom, paragraph I had never seen before. Night shift employees are not permitted to clock out. Any attempt to leave before shift completion will result in termination. My throat tightened. I let the paper fall from my fingers. And then, another sound. A soft click. The freezer door. It had unlocked. I didn't think. Didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open and ran. The warehouse was silent. The air felt too thick, too heavy. Like the store was holding its breath. Like it was waiting. I sprinted toward the front of the store. The aisles stretched on forever, too long, too empty. The checkout lanes were dark. The automatic doors were shut. I kept running, my boots slamming against the floor. Then, I skidded to a stop, and my heart dropped. There was someone standing by register 6. Still, motionless. A Walmart employee. I took a slow, shaky step forward. Bill! The figure twitched. I swallowed hard. Took another step. And that's when I saw their face. It wasn't Bill. It wasn't even human. Their skin was too pale, stretched too thin. Their eyes were empty, black pits that swallowed the dim light. And their mouth was wrong. Too wide, too grinning, like someone had tried to carve a smile into them and never stopped. The thing tilted its head. And then, from behind the registers, more figures stepped into the dim light. All in Walmart uniforms. All staring. Waiting. Their name tags were blank. Like they had worked here for so long, even their names had been forgotten. And then, in perfect unison, they whispered, "You have a shift to finish." I backed away, turned toward the doors. They slid open. The warm night air rushed in. I could hear the parking lot, could see my car. I took a step forward, then another, until I was outside. The doors slammed shut behind me. I gasped in the cold air, clutched my chest. I was out. I was free. And then, a noise from my pocket. A soft beep. My phone. A notification. I pulled it out with shaking hands. It was from the Walmart scheduling app. A new message. Shift complete. Thank you for your service. And attached to it, a digital receipt, with only one item purchased. My name, Jason Night Shift. Paid in full. No refunds. I turned back toward the store. Through the glass doors, the registers were empty. The figures were gone. Like they had never been there at all. Like I had just imagined it. But I knew the truth. Because in the reflection of the glass, standing behind me, was Luis. His uniform was clean now. His wounds were gone. And he was smiling. A new name tag pinned to his chest. Jason. I didn't turn around. Didn't move. I just stared at my reflection. Because I finally understood. Luis never left. And neither will I.